Today is October 7th, and we're having Daniel with us. Welcome back, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
And let's get started with what's going on in the Middle East. And we have the anniversary of what has happened last year between Israel and Palestinians.
hmm
How do you see the conflict right now after 1 year?
Well, I think one of the things you mentioned off screen was that this is, did October 7th change the situation in the Middle East? And I think in a lot of ways that people instantly came to grips with and are even starting to in the West is that the reality is extremely different than it has been. Israel has gone off the reservation, many times, 80, 92, the invasions, occupation of the southern half of Lebanon, all of the constant ongoing occupations, which settlements, which are clear and anti-humanitarian violation, colonization, oppression. Just a sickening display of Western arrogance and imperialism, and things. After Oslo, after all the pretend trials at uh, normalization, there was kind of a period where Israel was getting normalizing its relationship with some of the Arab elites, with Saudi Arabia particularly. All this has kind of put the Palestinian cause on the back burner, and there is what has been a lot of seething anger on the street, all over the Ummah, all over the Arab population, that they have been forgotten. That this is a massive central priority of their faith, their history, their relationship with the United States, which has invaded and suppressed virtually every country in the region. And now we have October 7th in the middle of this. Some of my friends who've come out and spoken and are activists on this issue called it the great prison break. This is a massive and desperate and bold attempt to break out of the open air concentration camp that Israel had been holding 2.5 million Palestinians in for years. And um, there is all sorts of questions whenever anything is central like this, and a huge part of this international conundrum of who's in charge, who calls the shots, why, who does what, who you should listen to in terms of what really happened, and whether or not you're listening to state propaganda or whether or not you're following one of the agendas of the elites involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things are huge when a a story like this takes a new turn like this. And one of the things that I think has changed forever, I really believe that this is a turning point in the Palestinian struggle that will be noteworthy forever in history. And that is this idea that the Israeli press and the Israeli controlled and allied Western press has been spouting for a generation, which is that this uh, demand that we take it slow. Remember all this stuff. It's complicated. It's complicated. It's nuanced. It's a very tense and difficult situation, and um, boom. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It is an occupying force dead set on the destruction, the genocide of the original inhabitants of this area. There's nothing new. There's nothing spectacularly different or unique about the victimization of these people. There is nothing that they can still drag out like they do at every possible opportunity. And they cannot still do that. One of the things that ended on October 7th was the free pass. And obviously, this has changed hearts and minds all over the world for more than a generation. 77 years, where, but after 9/11, the U.S. entered a period of grace with the rest of the Western world, certainly, and even generally, even enormous prayers in Iran, in Tehran itself. That people were gathering to express the grief, the collective grief, and this is something that it's just like when somebody in the family dies and people gather and wish you well. And then before you turn around, you learn that it was fake. I'm not talking about, truthers and all that crap about, the nanothermite and these, I'm talking, stay with the analogy now. This is somebody died, but they were old, but they were sick. And as it turns out, the family was using this. They were using this as a reason, as an excuse, as a backdoor entrance to get the estate, to steal all the money and the diamonds that were in Grandpapa's, bank account and bank deposit boxes. This became obvious to many of us immediately. Actually, to be honest, for me, there was less than a week after September 11th when I and my wife, it was just shocking what happened. It was absolutely, and we saw people. There were people gathering to light candles. Right, there was something that's to show solidarity just with these poor people who went to serve breakfast on the 107th floor of the World Trade Center, were just blown out of the sky and evaporated into dust, so that there were no bodies, there was no anything. It was a shocking time. We all remember where we were. We all remember how it happened. We all remember Julie and I went to New York several times as a kind of a pilgrimage, right? Within 5 days, what we saw in this country was a radical change in the outlook of Americans themselves. We were kind of just driving around. People had candles out, and we started to see very quickly people on street corners stepping into traffic, waving the American flag, basically feeling this bloodlust and revenge that the Karl Rove, all of Bush's people worked very, very heavily to stoke and to work to lather up. And I remember very early on in parks in New York, when we would go down to Ground Zero and kind of people would gather and talk in small classes, and they were Germans, different Europeans, and everybody was talking about different things. But one of the things that became clear was that the Europeans, who were very supportive, but they and the Americans, all of us were saying, what are they going to do next? This is horrific. What are they going to do next? And the they was very different between the Americans and the Europeans. what the Americans were thinking, what are these savages capable of now? How they attacked these buildings, they did this. What could they possibly do? The Europeans were thinking, they, meaning the Americans, if they have been attacked on their own soil like this for the first time that anyone can remember, and they have crazy people in charge, they are the only nuclear power who has actually used nuclear weapons in human history, and have zero remorse, or they are now unfettered. And what the hell are they going to do now? And we all saw it, bit by bit by bit. It slowly withered, not slowly, but the attacks on Afghanistan, Iraq, the 7 countries that what's his name, Wesley Clark mentioned, that the PNAC basically had in its mind, the Project New American Century. That was the kind of like the treasure trove of neocon crazies that had set up Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. I mean, you can help me out here. I don't know what
Somalia,
Somalia, Libya, right? Everyone knows. Everyone knew this. Everyone followed this, and they followed them one by one. And it not only went crazy, but seemed almost immediately that they were using this. First of all, people who say that it was planned, or what's the other one, is LIHOP, let it happen on purpose, right? There are all sorts of varying things. The question is, for what Naomi Klein has written about disaster capitalism and this whole concept of planning for the inevitable, or planning for what you plan for to plan, right? This is you can have plans on the shelf on what to do if they find blue cheese on the moon, and we're going to invade it, and we're going to mine it and colonize it. The same thing. There is a reason that you have an 800-page document outlining this restriction on internal civil rights, or the Patriot Act, within a week, right? That obviously doesn't happen as a result. And neither did any of the military adventures happen as a result of that attack. But, and this is why I seem to be long-winded, or I'm talking around and around and around. We have a long way to get to. What's he talking about? This is October 7th, not September 11th. But this is all of the ramp up. And I really believe that October 7th was when the world finally shook it off for the very last time. There are different ways to do that. You can say what has come out with the Hannibal Protocol, the idea that there were 1,300 people killed, and 70% of them were most likely killed by their own government, who a planned overreaction to just blow the crap out of anyone who happens to be in the same time zone as someone who attacked you, so that and they actually have called it the Hannibal Protocol, to kill as many people as possible, so that you don't so that they don't get caught, right? Is that the idea, that it's better that they die in combat, which means being shot in the back by a missile, instead of being captured and potentially giving out information to the enemy, which could lead to future failures. Now, that is one of the things. The other thing, that these have always been true. That's what I'm saying. And many, many people in the world, especially those who have espoused the Palestinian cause, have seen these things coming and have worked in them. My point is that every kind of organic transformation has a boom, a kind of a punctuation where it goes off the chart. And that is where now Al Jazeera can come back and have do their investigation with thousands. Now this is partly technological. You have a bunch of kids with their own cell phones who are drafted. I mean, it's not a volunteer army. It's the IOF, Israel Occupation Force, is a conscripted army, and they go in with their cell phones and they take pictures and have radical conversations and videos and clips, and they post them, and thousands of them on every possible platform of social media. And the Al Jazeera crowd themselves had thought that they would have to do a lot of digging and a lot of investigation to secure geolocation. Where are they doing this? But they're soldiers, right? So they have to hide what they're doing. They can't be, and besides, they are the head of the snake. They are the ones who are supposed to be implementing the Zionist argument, which is, oh, no, we're not interested. We're not here to kill civilians. We're here to uproot Hamas. We're here to maintain a deterrence for our own people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, they found hundreds and hundreds of examples of these terror-driven, killers with their phones in their hand. They didn't even bother to hide. They said where they were, what they were doing. They were torturing people, just destroying obvious civilian property just because they could, shooting unarmed civilians in a whole variety of. In other words, there's no nuance there. There's nothing. There is no complicated story. And people talk about having seen strikes and that they are doing this in front of the world. But if you see any of this, I took a glimpse. I did not look at it in great detail, but it is, as you would expect, it's like a repulsive Instagram where it's not just the Western media whitewashing, attacks and like this. This is on the ground, upfront admission of war crimes, anti-human rights violations through the roof. And this is Gaza. Now, of course, they were, already had occupied the entire West Bank, and they're trying to strangle all the people who are there individually and collectively, and then start another trip into Lebanon, to attacks against high-profile politicians of Hamas, of Iran, of Lebanon, of Hezbollah. And there was zero second thought, that and the whole world could see this for, I hesitate to say the first time, but in such clarity. This is how warped and repressed American knowledge and American sense of history, kind of awareness of the terrorism of its own empire, its own government. But it was so egregious that many Americans saw that for the first time as clearly as they did. And what it finally did, maybe it took too long. Obviously, there are millions of people who died because of it, but it wiped the slate more than completely clean. It brings world opinion back toward more of a reasonable approach to judging the heirs of the British empire in what they will do with a proxy, what they will support, what they will fund, what they'll pay for. And now we are in a new phase. People can look around. They can say, huh, yeah, okay. You can keep doing this thing. It wasn't us. We didn't know all about it. They're way off the reservation. We tried to tell them, but they went ahead and did X, Y, Z anyway. How? I mean, we can't really do it. Well, yeah, but see, you have sold them 68, 70% of the arms that they received before October 7th. And the Germans threw in the extra 30. So this is, whose wars are these? Whose terrorism is this? And you have a German population, which is the guilty remnants of the Second World War. And they're fighting a very entrenched concept of wir sind es nicht gewesen. This, as it was in German, means it wasn't us. We weren't the ones. And this was in the 80s. It was a big thing for German, basically the left, but also humanitarian, progressive propagandists to kind of make German youth take ownership of what their government did in the past, and not to be able to say, wir sind es nicht gewesen. No, it was us. And part of that is their full-on commitment to supply almost a third of the weapons that are slaughtering millions of innocent people. And the Americans are just really lazy and really given too much of a pass. Even after this, I do think something is changed. But what I hear a lot of people say, and in my travels all over the world, in all sorts of different places in different countries, people say, well, I love the people. They could be talking about Iran. They could be talking about the United States, talking about France or Nicaragua. I love the people. I reject what the government has done. And this is particularly telling for Americans, but because we have absolutely zero input. And Carter, who just turned 100, said this in his own right, even as an ex-president, said that there is zero correlation between popular will and policy. That just never happens in the United States. There is enormous distance between those two facts. But, you're still living this dream. You're still living a very, very different life than people have lived in the global South for the past several hundred years. You cannot take the profits, literally profits, of that supremacy, of that colonialism, and pretend that you have nothing to do with it. That's just, it's like greedy and filthy, and it leads to a rejection on a global scale. I've been saying this for years, and like it kind of, there are blips in it. But between, Ukraine and Israel, people around the world have had enough. And this idea of, especially now, to see this came across in today's news on local channels in Boston, right? That they pretend they're doing balanced coverage, and they have people saying that this is a very sad 1-year anniversary. Then you have people, the pro-Palestinian groups, who took over a major highway, and then one rabbi that they quote, who chooses to quote him, and make his quote be the lead for this news cycle is, anybody's guess. But he said that he wished protests weren't really appropriate because everybody should be grieving. I thought, nobody's listening to that anymore. They really are not. And I mean, I'm talking about politically, psychologically. I'm not talking about the on the ground. The on the ground military analysis is even more amazing and more frightening. But that's the overview of what the idea of October 7th has done to the Middle East, from the Iranian response to Iraq, to Syria, to Lebanon, to the Ansarullah, the Houthis in Yemen. People are uniting. Not only the rank and file, but governments are finding their footing in making things work. Iran was, there are many Palestinians and many Arab activists were upset that they didn't do enough against the U.S. in Libya, and that they allowed. This is like electronic intifada and all these kind of people. They allowed the martyrdom of Gaddafi, which I think is a stretch, and not really. They just didn't. That's like saying in 2014, Putin didn't do enough because he only took Crimea. He didn't march. It marched to Kiev sitting on a tank. That these are things work slowly until they meet that boiling point, and then the disagreement is over, basically, except for the king of Jordan, I guess, right? He's not. Nothing's going to change his mind.
Dan, do you think right now, how does Russia see the conflict in the Middle East? Do you think that they're going to get more involved with the conflict in the Middle East, or they're going to let it just, they're still waiting to see what would be the next move on the part of the United States?
I think this, I may have misspoken when I said that October 7th was a day that will live in infamy for the Middle East, because I think it is a Rubicon among Rubicons. It is part of many things that have happened. But if you have to choose dates, historians do this a lot. And a lot of it is crap, because they just like everything before X was this way, everything after X was this way. And that's never actually true. It's only when I missed some really, really important lectures on Russian history from when I was in college. And so I answered that on a final question was, well, that's ridiculous. You can't say that. You have to kind of have nuances and this and that. It turned out I was going against the Richard Pipes, who was the head of anti-Russian studies at Harvard when I was there. But if you take the October 7th, I think it applies globally, not just to the Middle East. And that applies to Russia as well. Russia has tried for many, many years, obviously, under the Soviet government, there was an occupation that was a proxy of the West, that was absolutely an ally of the U.S. in the Cold War. There was a very, very strong reason for the Soviets to back the Palestinian cause in very many ways. And that doesn't go away. It wasn't just that. That was Russian history. It wasn't just a communist doctrine. But it's not only since the breakup of the Soviet Union, but going back in history, there were a lot of Russians who emigrated to Israel. There's a huge connection of Russians with Israel. There are a lot of Russian Jews who went to live in Israel, a lot of people who blamed anti-Semitism in Russia, both the pogroms from the 19th century and some continued to push that reality or narrative after the revolution. And so there has been an enormous sense of ambiguity about Russia's kind of role in whether or not they should oppose Israel. And a lot of it has to do with their own populace, like especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians had and Soviets had populations in every corner of the world, especially in the Commonwealth of Independent States, around the borders of the erstwhile Soviet Union. And Israel was one of those places where many, many people wound up. So they have been careful. And let me say again, I think that's another thing that has bitten the dust. There is absolutely zero doubt about how, Netanyahu feels about Zelensky, right? Or how whose side the Zionists are on in Ukraine and in general in the enormous Cold War heating up that is not only restarted but re-inflamed between the West and those who want a multi-nodal follow-up to the hegemony of the Brits, the United States, and so on. So then you have also, wait, don't forget, you also have these crazies. These people are sociopaths. I mean, they are complete. When I say they, I mean the Zionists and the Americans who buttress their every move. They want wider war. They want war with Russia. They want war with Iran. So they have made no secret of picking Russian targets. Why did they bomb Tartus, the air base in Syria? I don't know. I mean, they have to decide, and this is on a diplomatic level. What they've always done is, well, back channel connections have kind of worked it out, and they kind of said, look, you do this again and we are going to rip you a new one, but publicly we'll just say we're not really sure, and this may have been a bad mistake. We want to make sure that we agree, and we blah 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 blah. Like I said, I think those days are over. They've been attacking Russian assets in Syria for years. They've been now in Lebanon, all over. They are starting to just pick a fight with everybody they can. And on one level, Putin just doesn't have a choice. I mean, they do have a choice in that they have made this interchange with Iran a reality. Now, they are as close as any NATO allies could say. You don't need an Article 5 to see what that means. Russia and Iran have been cooperating with the massive production of missiles, of drones, the leaps in technology that is a generation, maybe two ahead of anything that the U.S. can counter, and they are working together, and they will continue to work together. What the Iran hasn't done it against Israel. They've been doing it against the United States, because the United States has talked about nothing but invading, assaulting Iran, and overturning its revolution since 1979. And if you compare the two militarily and in terms of strength on every level, the U.S. Israel is no comparison for the U.S. So if they're ready to defend against the U.S., what does Israel think they're going to get away with? I mean, that's ridiculous. And now they have backing from the Russians and from China. China makes a really big deal of not that, we don't interfere in other people's, but they are sick of it, and they see what the non-West sees really clearly. Westerners, especially in the populations, don't seem to know any of it at all. In the same amount of time, in 20 years, the United States sends $6 trillion bombing the crap out of everybody, inventing nothing, giving nothing to these countries except massive destruction over and over. Meanwhile, China has spent trillions of dollars investing in its economy, in its progress, in lifting its people out of poverty, and trying to make a model and do the same for all of Africa, one country at a time, all of Asia. It's a ridiculous comparison, and the only ones who still see it that way are the ones who've written that policy. All these old white men who sit around, not to include myself, as I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm still white. Even my wife tells me that. But they want to believe that their propaganda works, and it's really bizarre to see, because who did you ever think you were talking to except for other people who could hire immigrants to mow their lawn like you do? Who do you think you are relative to all these people? And they still think, first of all, I don't know how. We've talked about this several weeks running about whether or not, do they really believe it? Is it finally people are saying, do they really believe that? They don't really believe that, do they? And this again goes back to Soviet U.S. relations. There's a great, fantastic stories. There were tons of Cold War stories that were hilarious, but this one was CIA and KGB guy at the end of the war. They meet in a bar, and they start arguing about each other's governments and military and intelligence propaganda. And one said, "Yeah, you know what though? So you won the Cold War. Your propaganda was just as bad as ours. Come on," says the KGB too. He probably said it with a Russian accent. Your propaganda is just as bad as ours. And the American, no, wait, because it's the American who says that. And the Russian says, "Yeah, but your people believed yours." That is the essential joke ending the Cold War. Yeah, but your people believed yours. And that is still true. It is still, how is it? Now, okay, let's look at this October 7th. How big is October 7th? How big a thing does it mean? Forget about Tel Aviv. Forget about Russia. Forget about, you know what the first week of October is the anniversary of? In 1937, Trujillo, who was an American puppet in Dominican Republic that they invaded 6 times to keep him in power, went ahead and slaughtered 40,000 Haitians. around in different corners of the Dominican Republic. It was called the Parsley Massacre. This was between October 1st and October 8th in 1937. And this is, if you're talking about global relations, global events, and waves of history, you have to include the big picture. We're talking about, last time I mentioned the divine right of kings, that King James invented this idea that God made him, king of his people. The U.S. develops this exceptionalism, white supremacy, a incredibly repulsive, racist, and thorough understanding that infects everybody's understanding, including mine. I'm not stupid. I don't think I'm above the psychology of a lifetime of living in the belly of the beast. But you have to look at what you are facing, what you are exposed to. And that, if you're talking about massacres, genocides that are linked to the first week of October, it's really important to remember that the U.S. has been doing this to, and the Brits before. Some a commenter got mad once because he said, well, he's blaming this all on Britain, but I mean on the U.S. But Britain and France were empires long before us. Well, I don't really care. I don't know. I'm a historian. I'm trying to talk in generalities, not what happened at the bridge in 1812 when whatever, right? This is a U.S. and British, an Anglo-Saxon tradition that goes on in why does every country in the world, well, it's many countries in the world, 65? What is it? They have an Independence Day, and poor Britain doesn't have one. Or that's the saying. And someone said, well, yeah, that's because we're all celebrating our independence from you. That's the point. And that is an amazing truth, that there are so many countries who have a special day set aside to celebrate their independence. Now, in your case, it might be Portugal, it might be Spain, it might be France, but the U.S. picked up with zero remorse and zero second thoughts to do exactly what the Brits were doing for half a millennium. And it is a train. People say that the U.S. has destroyed its transportation system so much, and the land ownership and capitalism have made it impossible for any high-speed rail to take effect in the U.S. Except for this. I know it's a metaphor, but this is high-speed rail. This is cynicism and imperialism at 600 kilometers an hour, at least. It is going straight off the cliff. And guess what? The election doesn't matter. I agree with John Mearsheimer. I heard him say the other day that he thought maybe if Trump had been in office, they might have avoided the constant escalation in Ukraine, because Biden as a warmonger has zero equivalent. I would argue that I think you've seen this, every president in ongoing history, every president is the worst one we've ever had, because you got to catch up. And that's true. I think that's true. It's like, Trump was worse. Well, then, Biden is worse, and Trump will be worse than Biden, but probably not in Ukraine. Definitely with Israel, and people are trying to goad people or guilt people into voting for Kamala Harris, which is from the same petri dish that Biden's criminals come from. And if you care about Palestine, Trump is really bad when it comes to Israel. It's like, well, okay. I don't think Iran's underground missile silos, Russia's hypersonic technology, I don't think they care whether it's Donnie or Cammy. They really don't. And the idea that the election matters, that the Americans matter, that the whole world is waiting for this. There is a bad thing. Netanyahu obviously thinks he might get an even better free pass from Trump. And he'd love to do something in October to change the result of the election, whatever that means. But there is no real choice to speak of. And this is a new era. And the paving has been done by Ukraine. I mean, by the Russians, by Iran, by Yemen, by Hezbollah, Lebanese, and there's certainly enough anger and enough energy to try to stop that runaway train, I think. Oh, I'm losing. Why did I lose?
Can you hear me?
Oh, now
Can you hear me right now?
Minute.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Okay. Thank you. Bye now.
Have a great time. Bye-bye.